Okay, so tonight starts Asara Teves. We don't actually begin fasting till the morning. What time did they send out the fast begins? Do you remember? 5:47 the fast begins, and it's over at 6:01. This is all Florida time. The Olam is not going to make it here Mugda. That means how early do you expect people to be able to leave their houses to come? So, you see what happens when we start before 9:30? We get the people to come. Anyway.
We're just starting.
So like I was saying, today is Asara Teves. The fast begins in the morning, and this we didn't want to strain you people too much before the fast. You're going to be up all night eating to prepare for the fast. So the Rebbe is going to talk about the unique nature of Asara Teves, and he's going to compare it to all the other different fasts, except for Tisha B'Av. It's mainly the three fasts are when you deal about Shivasar B'Tammuz, Tzom Gedalia, Asara Teves. So Asara Teves is the most serious of all of those, and the Rebbe is also going to bring out from that not the negative, but of course the positive. So he says, "Tainus Asara Teves hi mishum sheboy b'yom zeh samach melech Bavel." Samach is an interesting expression that's used in Chazal to express a siege, matzor, like he's soon going to say. And the Rebbe is going to focus later on, and in other sichos the Rebbe talks about it at greater length. Why specifically does it use the word samach? In a simple sense, samach means when you make a siege around the city, you surround the city, so you're like leaning on it. You're putting pressure on it. You have all these different things coming up against the wall and so on. So he says al Yerusholayim ve'evia b'matzor b'matzik, that there was a siege around it, there was discomfort and so on. Ubekach hischila hagolus b'chlal. With this, Golus began in general, meaning the Churban of Bayis Rishon, that because of that came about Bayis Sheni, the Churban of Bayis Sheni. So therefore, it all begins with Asara Teves. That was the first event. Before you had Shivasar B'Tammuz, before you had Tisha B'Av, before you had Tzom Gedalia, which were events that occurred later. 3 years prior to that, you had Asara Teves. Yet that's when you had the Matzor, you had the siege. So he says, they broke through the walls of the city. B'Tisha B'Av was the Churban Bayis Rishon. There is a machlokes when exactly Gedalia ben Achikam was assassinated. Tzom Gedalia is because even when the Nebuchadnezzar conquered Eretz Yisroel, he allowed someone from the house of David to be a governor, Gedalia ben Achikam. And there were some fanatic, whatever the reason was, he was assassinated, and then the whole idea of any shred of independence was lost. Because at least they had a governor. Here they had that, they lost that as well. And there's a machlokes if it took place either on Rosh Hashanah itself, but we fast on the day after because it's a tainis nidche, or it actually happened on the 3rd of Tishrei. This is all a continuation. It all began, the first thing was because there was a siege. And the Avodram says as follows. He quotes the Avodram. Lo hayu yecholim l'tchoyser l'yom acher b'nei shenemar boi be'etzem hayom hazeh k'moi b'yom HaKippurim, it says be'etzem hayom hazeh. In other words, just like when Yom Kippur comes out on Shabbos, you'll fast even though it's Shabbos. The same thing, Asara Teves is such a severe and chomer dika fast that you would fast if it would come out on Shabbos. Lepoil, the way they set up the calendar is that Asar B'Teves never comes out on Shabbos. The very fact even, he says also in the footnote, that you even fast on a Friday, which means that the fast goes into Shabbos, and we can only break the fast by Tzeis HaKechavim, that also shows on the severity. Even though lahalacha we might not paskin like David Ram, but still in all, the very fact that we do a fast on Friday, we don't push it ahead to Thursday or push it later to Sunday, that itself also shows how chumradik the fast is. Why is it so severe? Why is it even more strict than Tisha B'Av? When Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos, you push it off for Sunday. But Asara B'Teves, David Ram said, you wouldn't push it off. Because of that, since it is the one that started it all off, so it's always the beginning of everything is the most severe. So even though in some ways, obviously, the fast of Asar B'Teves is not as severe as Tisha B'Av, you don't have all the different, first of all, the time is only during the daytime hours, not like Tisha B'Av, that's a 25-hour fast. You also have all the other things that you're not allowed to do on Tisha B'Av, which on Asar B'Teves, you are allowed to do. But in a certain way, Asar B'Teves is still considered more chamur. That's why it would be Doichet Shabbos, according to Rav Adram. And to a certain degree, like I said, this Friday, it's also a little bit Doichet Shabbos, because you're going into Shabbos, into the fast. And even if you're Makabel Shabbos early, or you're Makabel Shabbos the way we're always Makabel Shabbos on a regular time, you cannot eat until Tzeis Chavim. So it comes out that you have a little bit of the fast on Shabbos also. But because it is the Shoydish for all the fasts, that's why it's more strict and more severe. And he says also in the footnote, he says a very interesting point, that on Bayis Sheni, when the siege took place on Bayis Sheni was not the same date of Asar B'Teves. But Asar B'Teves is such a powerful day that since it began all the problems for Bayis Rishon, so it's considered also a beginning for all the problems of Bayis Sheni. So because it's considered a beginning for all the problems of Bayis Sheni, therefore Asar B'Teves remains the date, and we don't go figuring out what date was Bayis Sheni was the siege, and we don't make anything on that date. So he says, "V'kivin shechurban Bayis Sheni v'agol shaba b'ikvoisav huhem shechurban Bayis Rishon," like we just now said, that he says in the footnote, "Ubemyuchad shanu royim shafila hageulah b'tkufas Bayis Sheni loy hoysa Geulah shlema." It's not like when Bayis Sheni happened, it's like, okay, everything went exactly back the way it was. Now we start from square one. No. Bayis Sheni was still suffering from the Churban of Bayis Rishon. How was it suffering? Shari Bayis Sheni chasru heidvarim. The Gemara says different things that were missing in Bayis Sheni. The fire didn't come down in Hashemayim to consume the karbanos. The Aron, the Luchas, the Kruvim, the Kapoiris was missing. There was no Nevuah. There was no, the Urim V'Tumim did not say, you couldn't ask by the Urim V'Tumim direction and Nevuah. All these things were missing in Bayis Sheni, which means it didn't like erase everything and we started from the beginning of Bayis Sheni. What took place in Bayis Sheni is a continuation of Bayis Rishon. Yoytze mekach she'asara b'teves hu'aschol v'hagoyim shel kol inyan hagolus. Now the Rebbe says in footnote 9 a very interesting point. In many other places the Rebbe talks about how Golus Mitzrayim is the first and the beginning of all Golus. But the Rebbe in the footnote says that really, to a certain degree, in certain Mamar Chazal, when it enumerates, it says that Yidden went into Golus 4 times. Sometimes they'll enumerate Mitzrayim, Bavel, Yavan, Rome, whatever, however they count the 4. But they start with Mitzrayim. In other places, they don't start with Mitzrayim. Why not? Because Golus Mitzrayim was before we were on Am, and was before we were in Yirah Yisroel, before we had a Beis HaMikdash. So it's not really Golus in the way that the rest of the Golus are. So what Golus began, and is really the beginning of all the Dalet Golus, that's really the Golus of Bayis Rishon. And in the Golus of Bayis Rishon, when did it start? It started with Asara Teves, when there was Samach al Bavel, that Samach al Yerusholayim, Melech Bavel. So therefore, this is where it begins. Asara Teves is all the Golus begin with Asara Teves. Next page. So he says, HaTorah kivas klal, sha'akadosh baruch hu magdim refuah lamaka. Kloimar, hu noisin koyach lekach, sheyagiu la'oifen hanayla beyoser shal refuah, oifen shal loy asim alecha. It says in Parsh Mishpatim, it speaks in Parsh B'Shalach, kol machos she'asamti b'Mitzrayim li'asim alecha, I will not place upon you, meaning it's not that a person can get certain of the things that went on in Mitzrayim, and Hashem is going to heal him, but magdim refuah lamaka, what we call in modern English preventative medicine. He doesn't allow it to happen in the first place. If something occurs, if a person gets sick, if a person gets a makkah, and then Hashem heals him, so the healing is only mekanul haba, it's only for the future. But there was a time when he had the makkah. There's also a situation where the healing could also be considered that it affects retroactively. Lepoili was sick. Lepoili had the makkah. But there are certain situations where we say the healing is such a thorough healing that it's considered that it's retroactive, it's lamafreya. That's not how it is by Yidden. By Yidden it is ala yoser mekach. Melachatchila loy asim alecha. So the Rebbe says like this, even when we come to the terrible makkah of Golus, that we are experiencing it, there is still the makdim refuah lamaka. We're suffering in Golus, but still know the way the Eibishter makes it in such a way that the refuah comes beforehand. Mekach move on shagam lagam makas hagolus higdem hakadosh baruch hu refuah lamaka af lefnei sheyischila hagolus she'ascholi hi ka'omer kasher samach melech bavel Yerusholayim kvar hera hakadosh baruch hu mahi harefuah dafke be'oifen shaloi asim alecha. He's soon going to explain what that means, but an example of this is that we find the Rebbe in other places brings down the famous Rashi, it says in Chumash about the Mabul. It says about the Mabul that when the Eibishter brought down the Mabul, originally he brought it down slowly. If the people in the world would have done Shuvah, so then the words of the Mabul would have been Gishmei Bracha. So instead of it being a negative, it would have been a positive. In a similar vein, the Rebbe is going to explain that the idea of Samach Melech Bavel had the opportunity to be a positive thing, and also in a deeper sense, b'pnimis inyanim, it was a positive thing. Let's see it inside. Chazal oimrim shasiba l'toikfa l'orcha shel Golus zu achroina ad kedei kach sheloi nisgalsa kitzam hisinas chinam. The Gemara asks, why was it that the Churban Bayis Rishon nisgalsa kitzam? They were told that the end of the Golus would be after 70 years. And that's what it was. 70 years they were on the Golus Bavel, and then it went over to Paras and Madai, and then they were able to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. But when it came to the second Beis HaMikdash, it's such a long Golus, and we were never told a date. It's going to be X amount of years. Why? Hisinas chinam. Because it's unnecessary hate, it's needless hate. Because of that, the Golus is very long. Well, if he's a move on, Shadafur, Hageulah min Golus, Yahepech, Ahavas Yisroel, Achdus Yisroel b'Shleimusa. And like a lot of times there's the Loshem Chazal, Ein Yisrael Nigolin Elabit Tzedakah, that only through Tzedakah will Yidden go out of Golus. So now the Rebbe asks, but didn't we just now say that this is the difference between Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni? Only Bayis Sheni was because of Sinas Chinam. Bayis Rishon was not because of Sinas Chinam, it was different Avedis, and that's why there was 70-year expiration date. It wasn't because of Sinas Chinam, so what are you telling me, that the idea of the Magdim Refuah Lamaka that we're talking about Asara B'Teves, which was by Bayis Rishon, has to do with Ahavas Chinam or Ahavas Yisroel, Achdus Yisroel? Seemingly Bayis Rishon had nothing to do with that. So the Rebbe says, "How do you do him? Divrei Chazal, shafilu kasher Yisrael oivdim avodah zara Rachman litzlan, hareim heim muchadim ein afsharis lishlut behem." So Maimer Chazal learns it out from a pasuk that Achdus prevents any punishment from coming down. There is actually, it's not just by Yidden. We see this also by the Dor HaFlaga, that because they were ba'achdus in building the tower, because they were building Migdal Bavel, ba'achdus, that's why he couldn't stop them. The only way he could stop them is by being the Bilbul Ashoinus. He made all the different languages. They couldn't understand one or the other. They got into a fight with each other. So that's how he could scatter them. That's how he could stop them. Kolshkin v'kal v'chomer a Yid, it says that openly, that if Yid would have Ahavas Yisroel, Achdus Yisroel, even the sin of Avodah Zarah would not be able to destroy them. Well, Afiza tzarich loymar she'af shel lifnei shehischil ha'maka shel ha'Golus hari b'motzar atzmui samach melech Bavel nasan HaKadosh Baruch Hu es hakoyach l'shalom u'la'achdus higdim refuah l'maka. In that motzar, in that type of siege, that itself is something that Hashem gave the Yidden this trufa, this medication, that if you take this medication, the Samach Melech Bavel, that itself will be the way to help the Yid. So he's going to explain how. HaHesber l'kachu, ha'motzar b'pashtus, matzav shel ein yoytzev ein ba. That's what a siege means. A siege means you can't go in, you can't go out. Af echad ein yochel lotzis ma'ir an etzura v'kulam muchrachim l'shar bayis ha'ir. V'af zor she'ena b'toish v'yir eini yochel ikonis gesham rak Yehudim. It's only a Jewish place. Me'ir Yerusholayim shehi ir shechubra la yachtav. There's a pasuk in Tillim. It's a city that they're all joined to it together. That the Rebbe explains, what does it mean, Ir shechubra lo yachtav, what's joined together? The Yidden are joined together. Mechaberes u'ma'achedes es kol Yisrael. Now, in Achdus, there could be different ways of Achdus. There could be Achdus like Migdal Bavel, could be an Achdus that has no content to it. It's an Achdus about Narishkeiten, about things that have no consequence. The Achdus over here is an Achdus of Yerusholayim. Yoser Mekach, Mehusash Yerusholayim, Mukenirmas Bishma, Yirah Shalem, Shleimus HaYirah. The Gemara explains that we find in some places that Yerusholayim is called Shalem, like it says Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem. And also in the Akedah we find that it's called Bahar Hashem Yirah, it's the level of Yirah. And the Teves on the Gemara explains that because that, and the Gemara says, so since we find these two different names, so we combine it, Yirah Shalem, we combine it together, Yerusholayim. Comes the Teves and says, what does that mean? That means that you have Yirah B'Shleimus, the awe of Hashem, the bittul to Hashem, the Kabbalah's oil to Hashem is in a Shalom Dikaway. And this is the Teves that says it, Yerusholayim hishpia Yirah Shamayim lechol elu shayibayim elaha v'royim es ha'avoida b'migdash v'ashpazu noisra b'hem gam la'achar sheyashvu sheshavu l'batayim. It's an amazing word. You think that this would be like in a Maimer Chassidus. But the Tosfos says this, that when a Yid came to Yerusholayim and he visited the Beis HaMikdash, so this influenced the person, and this inspired him to have Yerusholayim, to have Yirah Shalem. And not only did it inspire him b'shas Maisa when he was in Yerusholayim, but it inspired him even when he came home. What the impression that was left was there was mashpia Yirah Shalem b'chol ha'olam now. So now, what do you have when you have Yerusholayim is in the weight of a matzor? It's in the way of a siege. Ha-matzor ha-Yerusholayim goyrim b'kach sheloi zevavad sheYisrael meuchadim, like we mentioned before, that samach melech bavel, that it's a way that they're all together. Ele yoser mekach ha-achdus hi davke b'makim shel shleimus ha-yira achdus ha-muvasesses al Torah and Mitzvos u'kedusha. It could have been the matzor, could have been somewhere else. Where was the matzor? They were all trapped together in the most holiest place, in the place that brings about Yirah Shalem. So their Achdus was connected with a bittul to Hashem, with Kabbalah soil. Hascholos ha-Golus hi ba'ofen sha'amaka atzma yisricha ligrem l'refuah. So that's why this is the beginning of the Golus. The beginning, Asara Teves, was the date when the Matzor took place. Because we were given the opportunity to be able to make this a place of Achdus, to such a strong Achdus, an Achdus that's based on Torah and Mitzvos, which is the only real Achdus. He brings down in a footnote also that an Achdus that's dependent on other things are not necessarily a real Achdus, because everybody has their own mind and their own approach. But an Achdus that's based on Torah and Mitzvos, that comes from our true essence, from the Nefesh HaLekis. That's who we truly are. So the Achdus is a real Achdus. So if you want to have a real Achdus, it has to be miyusad on Torah and Mitzvos. So when you have the Achdus because of the siege in Yerusholayim, Yirah Shalem, so then you have the true level of Achdus. And that counters the physical idea of the siege, which was Chas v'Shalom to destroy Yerusholayim. Va'adrabe, ha'refuah keidemes l'maka, ha'achdus shegoyrem ha'matzor, maschila ubigolui miyad betchilas ha'matzor, af lifnei shemaschilim lochish betzares ubemaka shel ha'matzor. When a siege takes place, what is the meaning? What's the purpose of the siege? The purpose of the siege is to weaken the inhabitants. They run out of supplies, they run out of whatever they need. There's no food, there's no whatever else they need. But this is not something that's felt right away. But the idea that it's closed off, nobody can come in and nobody can go out, the Achdus part happens the first second of the siege. So the negative aspect, the Makkah, only took place later on. But the first moment, Asara Teves, was when you had right away the refuah part, the positive aspect of it. Surely it happens way before the goal of the siege, which the goal of the siege is to conquer the city. The Fiza, move on, what I mentioned right away at the beginning, Habitui HaMefir Legaba HaMotzor, She'eina Ragul Klal, Samach Melech Bavel. What's the idea of Samach Melech Bavel? Meloshin Smicha ve'ezra. That it was a support. And he says in the footnotes, like, Saimach Hashem l'chol ha'noiflim. In other words, it's something that is supporting us. Instead of an attack, Melech Bavel was helping us out. He was bringing us to a state of Achdus. V'yosim mekach, lo yhayez a matzav sheYisrael bachru boy, ela Nebuchadnezzar ichriach oisam li matzav b'mayim de matzav, shegarim b'derech hateva la'achdus Yisrael b'Yerusholayim b'yachtim Beis HaMikdash. Like the Rebbe a lot of times like to say, even the guy wants the Yid to do the right thing. It's like it says in Parashat B'Shalach, uparoi hikriv. So the Chazal say, what do you mean, pari hikriv? Hikriv means bringing someone else close. He was trying to say that Pari was getting closer to the Eden. It should have said, Upari Korav. Why does it say Hikriv? So the Chazal say Pari Hikriv, Es libon shel Yisrael lavim shebashamayim. So the Rebbe says the same thing over here. Nebuchadnezzar was forcing the Yidden to be ba'achdus and was causing them to be together. The very thing that Nebuchadnezzar was trying to do was really going to undermine him. It was shooting himself in the foot because he was going to bring them to Achdus, and therefore the whole reason for the siege would have stopped. Ad la'oifin shaloi asum alecha. Yeah, mamish. Lepoil, that's not the way it turned out, because in the end, you can't force a Yid to do anything. The Eibishter doesn't take away from us the Bechira Chavshis. Ach yesh li Yehudi Bechira Chavshis v'amatzav shel ha'motzar loy garam la'achdus amitis. It was only an external achdus that Lepoil, they were in the same place, but it didn't really bring them to a state of shalom. And therefore, Lepoil lefichach itzliach Nebuchadnezzar lishlit alei. So now the Rebbe brings us to the main point. The main point is, nothing is told as history. I saw this week an interesting mimer where the Rebbe explains, like at great length, the whole idea of how, say, Vayikra Shel of Yehuda, you need to understand the Baruchnias. So he says, why am I explaining all this? Many Mamarim explain this idea of Vayikra Shel of Yehuda. The point the Rebbe starts a lot of Mamarim off is because everything that's written in the Torah and everything that occurs is a Yirah Nitzchis. And though the story of Vayikra Shel of Yehuda happened thousands of years ago, it needs to mean something in my Avodas Hashem now, because Torah is Yirah and Torah is Nitzchis. So therefore the Rebbe says, we must know what Vayikra Shel of Yehuda means Beruchnias. In a similar vein over here, but here it's even stronger. The purpose of a fast day is not about a diet. It's not only about the past, it's not about dieting. There was once a bacher that it says in the Yirah Shalem about different types of fasts to be able to be masakin certain avedas, and he had like a whole list of fasts that he was trying to do his own personal fast. And he was once, this was during the communist times or just during the Civil War in Russia, and he was like running from place to place. And you realize towards the end of the day, you know what? I didn't eat anything today. I have another day that I can mark down in my book to add to the number of fasts. So he said to himself, that's not fasting, that's dieting. Fasting is an intentional, it's a serious thing. And you right away grab something to eat something, they shouldn't, chas v'sholem, consider it as a fast. So the Rebbe says the same thing over here. We're going to go through Asara B'Teves. It's not just meant stam to lose weight, and it's not also meant just to remember, okay, this is what happened then. Matarosam shel Ahavas Yisroel la'orer halavavis leftoyach darkei hatshuva. Sha'idei zikaron hadvarim shegormu la'oisen hatzaris Nashuv lahetiv, will do tshuva pashut. That's the idea of the fast, that we should do tshuva. We should repair those things that we messed up that originally caused all of this, to bring about the state of the way it was before all this happened. We'll move on. Sha'asara b'teves maskir liyehudi b'roish u'b'rishoyna sha'derech levatl es oisn hatzaris he b'mtzois Ahavas Yisroel v'Achdus Yisroel. Shekol haYehudim yisachtu ba'ofen shel chubra lo yachtov ba'achdus hakshura l'shleimus haYirah l'beis hamikdash. Like we said before, it's not just stam they're getting together in Yerusholayim, Yirah Shalem, Ir shechubra lo yachtov. The Achdus is coming from Kedusha. Hapnimi, which is also the inner Beis Hamikdash of a person. We don't have the physical Beis Hamikdash. So we have the inner Beis Hamikdash, that it says Hashem rests in every single Yid. Achdus hamvosses al Torah and Mitzvos, a Achdus that's based on Torah and Mitzvos. That's what we are learning from Asara B'Teves. And then when we will implement that, and we will take this lesson from Asara B'Teves to heart, so then all the fasts will cease. And not only that, but the Rebbe always emphasizes, brought from the Rambam, brought from where it says in Navi, that it's not just Pshat when Mashiach comes. All the fast days will stop being fast days, but v'yoyser makachim yahavchu liyos yom tov v'yemeisasim v'simcham. V'kiven shayirida shal sora b'teves hiyoyser mishar atzoymes k'dleil b'sif aleph. How much more severe it is that the Vadram says that if it were to come out on Shabbos, we would have fasted on Shabbos. So because it's such a severe fast, and it's the beginning of all the Golus, so it's understood that the Simcha is the greatest of all the fast days. Tia gam ha'aliyah g'dola yoser. She'agiu l'darga shal etzem hayom hazeh. We said before, Gzeira Shavet says etzem hayom hazeh by Asara b'Teves, and it says etzem hayom hazeh by Yom Kippur. B'daimel Yom Kippurim l'mal yusa. That the day of Asara b'Teves will be transformed and be as great and as high as Yom Kippur in the positive, which Yom Kippur is called Shabbos Shabbosin, which means Hanayla Shabbos. It's not an ordinary Shabbos, it's a Shabbos of Shabbos. Hasiri Yir Kodesh, the 10th, meaning the 10th of the month, will be holy. But it's not just the 10th of the month, because really it's 10-10. Teves is the 10th month from Nisan. So it's the 10th month, and it's the 10th day of the month. So you have twice 10, and we know the Chumash says Asiri Yir Kodesh, so we'll reach the revelation of that ultimate Kedusha, the Asiri Yir Kodesh, with the bittul of the whole reason for the Golus, and Mashiach should come already. This Asar B'Teves, which will already be in Yerusholayim, Kodesh, Yirah Shalem, Achdus.